Nah, imagine this, y'all. Sky high grocery prices, crop fields going unpicked, items eerily missing from shelves. You've seen this all before. It happened during COVID 19. Back then, supply chains broke and inflation surged because there weren't enough workers. Port operations grinded to a halt, and factories couldn't make or move goods fast enough, and prices spiked as a result. Now we have the same type of dynamic. A supply disruption driven by labor shortages is threatening America's food supply yet again. And this time, it's not a deadly pandemic, it's our own government's backwards ass policies. Today, we're diving into how immigration enforcement is risking what no political ideology should ever touch: the food that feeds the nation. We're breaking down how this mirrors COVID era supply problems, why it matters, and who suffers. It's your boy Trey, and this is Pragmotiv News. During the COVID era, the US economy was hit with a massive supply chain disruption that rippled through prices and inflation. As economists wrote for the Brookings Institution, massive supply chain disruptions during the COVID 19 pandemic have fed into inflation with long lags. Global distribution networks from ports to trucking were stretched thin, factories closed temporarily, and bottlenecks persisted long after the virus waned. These breakdowns pushed up the cost of inputs, which helped drive the inflation surge between 2021 and now. Simply put, when supply can't meet demand, prices rise and scarcity follows. Now let's connect that to immigration enforcement. Agriculture and food processing depend heavily on immigrant labor. This is a fact documented in multiple industry reports. Recent ICE enforcement has pushed many of these workers out of their workforce by simply making them too scared to show up. As one Farm Bureau warned in reporting from Newsweek, continued labor disruptions could affect the food supply chain, drive up costs for consumers, and force farms to shut down or automate more quickly. So this is starting to happen, and that affects your food and your wallet. Let's be crystal clear about what happened during COVID. Goods were made but couldn't get to the market because ports were overwhelmed. Labor shortages and shutdowns slowed production everywhere, and that supply tension pushed prices higher and inflation skyrocketed. Economists noted that supply chain pressures accounted for a large share of the inflation surge after COVID. Let's put the comparison next to the current situation. COVID equals supply disruption from illness and shutdowns, and Trump's ICE enforcement equals supply disruption from deportations and people self-removing themselves from the workforce because, again, they're scared. Both reduce labor availability, both choke production, and both risk prices increasing yet again. Early analysis is already seeing the effect of deportation-driven labor shortages on agriculture, showing signs of higher food prices and economic pain in the farm sector. The lie that keeps getting repeated is that domestic workers will replace the food labor force when immigrant labor disappears. But the reality says the complete opposite. Experience shows that when farmers lose workers, they cannot simply replace them overnight with domestic labor, not at scale and not at speed. So even the right-leaning publication Reason.com reports that, quote, almost 14.5 million tons of produce were left unharvested across the United States in 2023 alone due to labor shortages. Now, these labor shortages were already a problem back in 2023, and now the Trump administration is making the problem much worse by scaring people into not showing up for work. Or worse, they're deporting people who do not have a criminal record so they can reach these sick quotas that they're setting. This is causing a supply shock that will drive up prices, just like we saw post-COVID. A Washington Post article notes that the government now admits that strict enforcement is destabilizing food production and threatening higher food prices. So this is the core lesson here. Policies driven by resentment and blame end up hurting the people who supported them because systems don't bend to slogans. Hate always has consequences. And that's not a slogan, it's a historical fact. And that matters today, especially on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Dr. King fought for equality under the law. He spoke about a future where people would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by their humanity. That vision was about dignity, restraint of power, and equal treatment, especially by the state. Yet today, we are having a real documented debate in this country about immigration enforcement practices that rely on profiling, broad suspicion, and fear. Practices that civil rights groups, courts, and watchdogs have repeatedly warned can disproportionately target people based on race or appearance. That realization should be sobering for everyone. Because when enforcement loses its moral grounding, when policy becomes detached from principle, history shows us what follows. Harm spreads outward, consequences multiply, and the damage rarely stays contained to the people originally targeted. In the pandemic, when supply chains broke, it wasn't political theater. It was real people unable to do real work, pushing real prices up, causing real consequences. Now, when deportations shrink the farm workforce, supply weakens again, and prices respond the same way. Put simply, supply constraints equals higher prices. And that's exactly what history and data show. So here's the hard truth. You cannot deliberately sever the labor force behind your food supply and expect outcomes to be any different from the last major supply shock we lived through. You cannot impose a shock on the supply side of the economy without paying for it, whether that's in higher prices, unmet demand, or rationed access. You don't stabilize a system by ripping out its foundation. That collapses it. And the ecosystem that sustains the American lifestyle is far more fragile than we'd like to admit. When one critical piece fails, the entire thing can unravel fast. And this is why this conversation matters. Not because it's partisan, not because it's ideological, but because systems don't care what we believe. They only respond to what we do. If this changed how you think about food security, or put what ICE is doing into a clearer perspective for you, please share it with someone who still underestimates how fragile America's systems are. And if you want more content that focuses on consequences instead of the noise, consider subscribing. It helps us out more than you know. I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace.